Hello and welcome back. So as I promised in the last video, I'm going to model the Master Sword from Blender. I found the Master Sword image online and just added it as a background reference image. You'll notice the sword right now, since I started with the cube, it has a lot of height, which is kind of annoying, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete the entire thing. Hit 7 to jump back into top ortho view. And remember, we have to be in orthographic. If we're in perspective, we won't see the background image. And then I'm going to hit Shift A, and I think I'll just add a cube. I want to make sure this is at the world origin, so I'm going to hit Alt G to recenter that. And now I want to jump into tab mode. I'm going to hit W and merge at center. So now all we have is a single point. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag that back to about here. And now I can just kind of zoom in and extrude that point. And now we'll have a lot of precision, kind of like creating the edge of the sword. Later I might come back and actually change this into a cylinder for the hilt part. But for now I'm just going to go with it and see how it turns out. So I'm just moving around, extruding and aligning these points. Whoops. I accidentally clicked in my mouse wheel and dragged the view. So once again, that's 7 to go back into top view. E to extrude, and I'm going to stop right here, like right on the line. This is the y-axis, so I'm going to scroll up here, and just to make sure this is perfectly aligned, I'm going to set the y element to 0. And now that point is perfectly aligned with the red line here. So now I have half of the sword as just a flat line. There's still no faces, so if I tried to render this, we wouldn't see anything. You actually need faces for anything to render at all. So why don't we go through and actually make some faces. Now to do that, I think what I'll do first is add a mirror modifier. And it's not doing anything, that's because it's trying to mirror across the x-axis, which is this red line. I think we want to go, oh actually, let's see. Oh, okay. So yeah, it's jumping across the y-axis along the x-axis. We want it to jump across the x-axis like that. So that'll be along the y. And to test that, I just created a simple face here so we could see the face jump across. I'm just going to undo that now that we have the orientation set correctly. And I think what I'll do is just jump back into top view, and then I'm going to grab this point and extrude it along the x-axis. And to make sure it stays on that axis, I'm going to hit the X key. So now it's only going left and right. I'm going to move to there and create a face on these 4 vertices. And to create the face, the hotkey is F. So E to extrude, X to go on the x-axis. Right-click all the points, holding Shift, and F to create a face. And if you don't want to hit X every time, you can also, when you start moving the point, you can middle-click the mouse wheel. So like I hit E, whoops, I hit E, I've got the point. I'm going to move it over this way. And then when I middle click the mouse wheel, now it's locked to that axis. And select all these faces, hit F to create a face. And you'll notice there's some dark shading over here and then some light shading over here. And that's because Blender isn't sure which way to make the upward direction on these faces. Typically in 3D, faces only go in one direction. So if I take all of this and extrude it up, now these faces are facing outward, and these darker ones are actually facing inward. Just to show you what I mean, if we turn on backface culling, those darker faces, they're they're oriented to face inwards, so if we look in from the outside, we don't actually see those faces. And so we're kind of seeing into the sword, and then we can see like the far wall inside the sword. That's definitely not what we want. So I'm going to undo that extrusion. And later, if we want to flip the normals on those faces, we can just hit Control-N, and that should make everything consistent. For now, that's not a huge issue. So E to extrude, X to go on the X-axis, create another face, E to extrude again. And I know technically when you're creating faces in 3D, quads are the better way to go. So right here I've got 5 vertices, when it's a lot better to have 4 vertices per face. But I haven't really run into any issues with that personally, so I don't make a huge deal about it. Just making quads and triangles. Whoops. Another trick to make this a little bit faster is right here I have this point selected, and what I'm going to do is Control, and I'm going to right click up here, and what that's going to do is select all, like it's going to find a route of points to get to the last point I select. So Control, right click, that got all 4 vertices that I want to make the face on. So I could do the same thing, right click here, Control, F, right click here, Control, right click, F. Alright, so now we've got the flat version of the sword. If I jump into top view and hit H, now you can see it pretty much perfectly aligns with the actual sword. Now we want to try to give this some depth. So for that, I'm going to hit Alt H to unhide my sword. I'm going to tab back into edit mode, A to select everything, and I want to just extrude this just ever so slightly, maybe to about there. And after you do that, remember, if you have any weird normals, just hit Control-N, and that should recalculate the normals to make everything face outside. If you check this inside box, you could make everything face inside. And so in that case, you would see through the sword, and you would see the like outside edge of the sword. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but whatever. Now I'm going to scale this down on the Z-axis quite a bit. And now I'm going to Alt-right click on the center line. And that's supposed to grab the whole ring, but for some reason Blender isn't seeing this as a ring, so I'm just going to Shift, Alt-right click, and hopefully get, whoops. Shift, Alt, right click. There we go. And if I hit Z to go into wireframe view, I can confirm that I only have that middle line selected. Looks good. And now I'm just going to hit S and Z to scale this out. Maybe to about there. It's starting to look a little bit better. 7 to go back into top view. I'm going to hide the sword again. There's kind of a lot of detail on the hilt, but I'm not sure if that's something we care to model. If we knew how to UV model, or I mean, if we knew how to UV map this texture onto the model, you could actually fake a lot of that detail just having the texture on the geometry. Sometimes you don't actually want to create geometry for every little feature like that. So I'm not going to bother modeling it now, because I do think that that would be more appropriate to have in a texture as opposed to on the geometry. Let's see, Alt-H. I feel like this is looking pretty good. I'm not totally happy with the hilt, so I might actually change that to a cylinder. But you know, I think the rest is really not bad. So I'm just going to go ahead and change the hilt now. So for that, I'm going to tab back into edit mode, Z for wireframe. And what I want to do is just select the entire hilt and delete it. So for that, I hit B for box select and just grab all this geometry, X, and delete vertices. So now we have the blade without the actual round hilt part. And I'm going to right click here and then Shift S and move the cursor to my selection. Cursor to selection. There. So now I've got it kind of like perfectly aligned with where the hilt should be. I'm going to hit Shift A and create a cylinder. I don't think we need nearly that much geometry, so I'm going to set this to about 16. And then I'm going to change the radius to about 0.2. I want to rotate it around the y-axis by 90 degrees. Tab into edit mode, scale down on the x-axis. 7 for top ortho view, scale on the x-axis. Alright, now I just want to select this ring, so I'm going to Alt, right click here, extrude that, and I'm going to middle click the mouse wheel so that it locks to this axis like that. Place it here, scale it up. Scale in. Alright, so I think that that's a little bit too round. And it definitely makes the sword look too flat. So once again, I'm going to Alt right click this ring, and I'm just going to pull this up a little bit. Same thing on the back. Alt right click, pull down. And now the tip of the blade actually needs to be scaled in quite a bit. So I'm going to select these and S, Z, scale that in, especially on the very tip. That's starting to look better. Now I think the hilt is a little bit too tall, so I'm going to select that. And again, that was right now they're two separate objects, so I'm jumping in and out of edit mode to select the objects. So tab into edit mode for this hilt object. A to select everything, and S, Z to scale down. That's looking a little bit better. And now I want to connect these, so I'm going to select both objects and then hit I think it's Control J. Yeah, that was it. So that joined them into a single object. The reason they were separate objects is because I added the cylinder in object mode, not in edit mode. So if you were doing all of this in edit mode, it should still be a single object for you. Now it just occurred to me that the hilt is now getting the mirror modifier. So we have to account for that. So I'm gonna jump back into top view, and I'm just gonna delete the whole bottom half of the hilt. Delete vertices, and now since the mirror modifier is on there, it's being mirrored across. Looks like we lost a few faces more than we wanted to. Oh, there we go. So I had one too many points selected. That's better. And now to join these, I'm going to Alt right click on this ring, Shift Alt right click on this ring, and then I want to do W and bridge edge loops. And that failed spectacularly, so I'm just going to do this manually. To give myself a little bit more geometry to work with, I'm going to right click here, Shift right click here, W and subdivide. Now I've got one extra point here, just to kind of round this out a little bit. Yeah, that's not so bad actually. Same thing down here, subdivide. Alright, I'm back. My hard drive actually ran out of space, so my recording software stopped recording. Anyway, I'm back now, so I'm just going to keep merging this geometry as best I can. Alright, so that's not so bad. Oh, and the bottom of the hilt actually got messed up when we did the mirror modification, so to fix this, I'm just going to Alt right click here and hit the F key. So now if we jump into top view and drag this off, you can see it's not like the blade part isn't exactly what it should look like here. But especially if you're a beginner, if you can achieve this level of detail, you're doing great. Nice job making it this far, and I'll see you guys in the next video.